And now live programs have incredibly important role when it comes to the state of collective consciousness. So please allow me to say a few things to that so that we don't miss this as an opportunity. I don't know how many of you are familiar with, well, I'm sure most of you are familiar with transcendental meditation as a global phenomenon, right? His Holiness Maharishi Mahesh Yogi brought transcendental meditation to the world, and he made meditation arguably single-handedly into a household item. Yes, of course, we should also give due to all other extraordinary teachers from the Orient, from India, from China and Japan and other countries who have advanced to the West and taught meditation in various forms and various ways for the past, well, I don't know, let's say 100 years. Let's just say for the past 100 years, and more so for the past maybe 70 years or 60 years, right? Since the time of the 60s, there has been meditation revolution, term established by or belongs to Swami Muktananda. So meditation has been on the rise ever since. Buddhist teachers, right? Yoga teachers, Sufi teachers, certainly many, many Hindu masters and teachers that came and taught, as it often been referred to, Dharma. And yet not that many people, so it seems, are aware of the more advanced programs offered by some of these teachers. Thus, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi came up with an advanced program known as TM-CD program. CD, S-I-D-H-I, not double D, because that term was already customized by his peer in the field, the aforementioned Swami Muktananda, with his Siddha Yoga Foundation, Siddha Yoga. So sometimes in the 70s, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi came up with a program which has been registered and copyrighted as TM-CD program. This TM-CD program is aimed at accelerating human consciousness. This is just in one line. That accelerating human consciousness, of course, here can be immediately translated or explained as awakening that latent potential present in every human being at birth. It is based loosely, but it is based on the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Maharishi picked up, selected only 16 Yoga Sutras to utilize into this program, where the normal meditation, which is 20 minutes, half an hour, the TM, the so-called TM, is being then supplemented into a very different form of meditation, which aimed at accelerating human consciousness. So, this program, as soon as it's been launched and tested, has been given a next series of tests, when sometimes in the late 70s, a series of tests have been conducted, notoriously in Washington, D.C., to see how these programs impact collective state of affairs. In other words, the impact of groups of people practicing this advanced course and how that reflects in the immediate environment. Some of you, I'm sure, have heard of this man who speaks a lot on these topics. His name is Greg Barden. He is one of the few people today, along with Bruce Lipton and Dr. Joe Dispenza, who know about this from first hand, and it seems that only the Greg Barden still gives credits to the TM movement and to the Maharishi more rarely, but to TM movement always, about the impacts and research is done with regard to the impact that the groups of meditators have on the collective consciousness. You can look it up, even one of the Greg Barden latest video, which came into my feed only a day or two ago, where he mentioned that again in response to this, what we all now experiencing as that Russian-Ukrainian conflict, where he spoke about how these conflicts can be prevented or at least minimize their impact. Please have a look. The reason why I'm bringing this up is to draw this narrative along with drawing the parallel with the work we do. But first, let me complete this story. So this series of tests conducted in Washington, D.C., I believe sometimes in 1978, as early as 1978, I believe, maybe even earlier, have shown the reduction in crime rate, road accidents, violent crimes, and overall mood of people. We can go further and even talk about the impact that this has on the environment in terms of weather, vibrations, and the impact that it has on how an average folk felt on that particular day or that particular week when these programs were conducted. Obviously not a single day, because then there will be no data available. They have been conducted during a period of time. The measurements and all the statistics were available, and soon after this series of experiments, right, a series of researches being completed, the so-called usual statistics went back to how they were prior to that in that particular area. This, of course, gave a lot of room for thought, a lot of room for hope, as well as for speculation. One way or another, these methodologies were even called as conflict preventing measures. Obviously, and not surprisingly, given the state of affairs of the world today, none of the leaders truly taking this into their hands to utilize this, although I should immediately say that when it comes to utilizing all these subtler impacts that consciousness altering practices are known for, have always been a coveted interest of all superpowers. Soviet Union and the United States, or even going as far back as Nazi Germany, conducted their own researches in the way consciousness can perform so-called amazing things, miracles. The yogis were invited, sometimes and often against their will, to take part in these experiments. I even remember myself growing up in Soviet Union, in Uzbekistan, when some of these materials were available at the scientific periodics of its time. We're talking about 70s. So this aspect of group of meditators gathering together and doing their work, impacting the environment, is very well known by now, and not just because of the researches done by the proponents of the TM movement, as well as those who were independent researchers. It is very well known because there were studies made on Buddhist monks, studies were made on various other groups of people involved systematically, it's very important, in a particular, utilizing a particular methodology which could be considered advanced. So let us not mix apples and pears here, because I don't want you to be under the impression that just because someone learned meditation and sits down for 20 minutes there, even if together with 100 people, then that will necessarily create or generate the impact required for any seizable or any lasting, let alone preventive measures when it comes to conflicts which are results of deep accumulated stresses which reach catastrophical proportion and then break out in form of wars, famines, and various kinds of human conflicts, including various kinds of epidemics. This is proverbial and always been known to the ancient folk before we were dependent too much on a rational thought and too much dependent on what the developing sciences were telling us. But the science made full circle now and came and arrived at these revelatory conclusions that in fact that observed phenomena puts us face to face with the inevitable acknowledgement that there is nothing other than consciousness. And it must be so because from that deep scientific inquiries made into the essence of matter, we have realized that nothing has substance of its own. It's pure energy vibrating with a speed which is measurable even mathematically, and that frequency and the degree of that, it's all there is. Other than that, there is no such thing we can call matter, and the very term matter almost became a dirty word because it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't really signify a thing. So this is where also a lot of spiritual teachings and how they took hold, because it all coincided with these breakthroughs in the sciences, namely, of course, the quantum sciences in the first part of the 20th century. And then by the time these breakthroughs have been publicized enough, took another few decades. So by the time of, let's say, late 20th century, we all became aware, more or less, the educated of those of us, that there is more to the world than what we thought about it before. And the 21st century came with extraordinary breakthroughs, as well as researchers that were sitting in the cellars of the archives from the last century, that is the 20th century, in the field of neuroscience. And I always like to quote, and I'd like to bring into discussion the classic and seminal work of Lynne McTaggart, known as The Field. This is a revelatory book, and if there are any skeptics out there in terms of, this is wishful thinking, this is just a, mumbo jumbo, this is soft science, this is, just blah, blah, blah spirituality. Well, read that book. It's not just, it's like the whole glossary of what went into that book reads as a brochure on its own right. So that book, The Field by Lynne McTaggart, which is added into our suggested list of reading, speaks about these breakthroughs and findings of the neurophysiology, which are purely and utterly astonishing. So, going back to these technologies of consciousness, these methodology-based technologies of consciousness that have been utilized already, and not only in that part of the world, the groups of so-called, this term could be used in parentheses, of flying yogis, because the accompanying phenomena of those TMCD courses are known for people hopping, like frog leaping on mattresses. And you can find videos out there. There are plenty of these videos have been since a while. So these groups of flying yogis were employed in various areas of world conflicts. And of course, it's very difficult to say to what degree of success, because no official bodies have ever took interest in that. So in other words, it was always down to the initiatives of spiritual movements. In this case, the Transcendental Meditation movement was behind organizing this group of yogic flyers in Israel and Palestinian conflicts, in the time of the breakdown of Yugoslavia when the civil war erupted there, in other areas as well, in Iran and in various places in the former Soviet Union. Some of them on a smaller scale than others. The Yugoslavian conflict was particularly known because this is where I remember in the early 90s, when I first arrived to London, there were these constant groups of TM, Siddha meditators that would go and spend some time and come back to England and then go and spend some time, and they were on a rotating basis. People were going to these areas where, were known for a fully blasted war. Obviously, they were not sitting in the region of the immediate combat, but they were in the vicinity, which was considered proximate enough to give an effect which will provide a certain cushioning to the situation. So this is what the other signature of this work, that this work has the very same principle and the very same impact, because in our work, when we gather together, the acceleration is inseparable from that quickening, which brings about a very similar, if not identical, phenomena in terms of the functioning of the neurophysiology that is reported to happen in the aforementioned TMCD programs. So this gives us the confidence to say that our live programs are not only individually tailored for personal evolution of so-and-so, because a lot of people, this is not a secret, come to our programs simply because they belong to that category where the awakening went astray, where they've been maybe mishandled by some kind of involvement with this or that group, with this or that teacher, where they did not had enough information and guidance. So in other words, we also have that to a very large degree, by the way. Our programs have been notorious for that from get-going. People with so-called cases of spiritual emergency of various kinds, or chronic conditions accumulated over years of practices, maybe done in a haphazard way, or the practices that were resulted in backfiring in one way or another, also find their ways into our workshops, into our live immersions. But one way or another, once we get together, the work has its own agenda. If you like, I often say, Shakti has her own agenda. We may come there with whatever we wish for ourselves, but that wish is being reabsorbed and becomes subordinate to what this work is about. So therefore, I welcome all of you to, those of you who are newcomers to this work, I have never been in live programs, to be fully aware that this work is also, we could say, the very visceral answer to the world's problems in terms of what we are facing now, and what we are facing now is not a small challenge. What we are facing now is directly requiring from all of us, those who are already on the path, those of us who already somehow entered the spiritual work, the understanding that this spiritual transformation is not done only from individual point of view. Okay? It is here to assist the collective state of affairs. This is important to understand. So, looks like our baby woke up.